Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. 1,000 years later, even my weakest follower has become a demon king. Chapter 41 Tower Guardian. Colt listened to the conversation between Vincent and William as beads of perspiration dripped down his forehead. He kept questioning himself if his choice of staying was right. Although he didn't understand much of their conversation, he could understand what William was saying about Vincent becoming the new ruler of the Blackwater province. He didn't just understand it, he was horrified by what he heard. Could the Blackwater province's Duke of Thorn be replaced just like that? What was even more terrifying was that when the two of them were talking about this topic, they didn't argue about the possibility. Instead, the discussion about whether they were willing or not and what meaning it had. "I refuse," Vincent finally said. With that said, he raised the magical medium in his hand and assumed a combat pose. William looked at the lightning on Vincent's magical medium and assessed it inwardly. The other party was probably at the level of a random high-level mage from the Mage Guild in the late stages of the game. Of course, he might have some trump cards, but in short, the battle would be over in seconds. Therefore, he reminded him, "Are you sure you want to do this? You should know that you don't stand a chance." Vincent knew that it was the truth. The other party could have treated him as target practice when he previously used zero entropy, giving him countless opportunities to kill him while time was stopped. However, he retorted with a question, "I'm aware, but will you be kind enough to let me off alive after my rejection? You can leave and take your time to think about it when you get back." "There's no hurry. I have plenty of patience," William replied casually. Vincent asked suspiciously, "Then, aren't you afraid that I'll tell Duke Simon of your intentions?" William shook his head. "You've misunderstood." Looking at Vincent's puzzled expression, he continued, "First of all, what I just said isn't an attempt, but a fact that's destined to happen. Secondly, I don't care if you or anyone else ultimately takes over. You are my choice simply because I think it's more convenient. It might stabilize the situation faster and reduce the number of innocent casualties. That's all." William paused and continued, "Of course, if there's any other reason, it might be because your daughter is a kind person. I'll feel a little bad killing her father." "Liliana." Vincent hesitated for a few seconds before speaking. However, William raised his voice slightly and interrupted Vincent. "But, my patience will remain until you attack me. I'm not magnanimous enough to let go of someone who tries to kill me. By the same logic, unless I find a better candidate than you, my suggestion that you control Thorn City will last until you stand opposite me. When the time comes, I won't be so merciful." Vincent understood the meaning in the other party's eyes. Therefore, the lightning on the magical medium dimmed. He bowed slightly to William in greeting before slowly turning around and leaving. "I know there are some things you might find difficult to accept for the time being, but I hope you think through it carefully. Between a country controlled by the three moon realm goddesses and a country where humans don't need gods, which is more in line with your expectations for the future?" William said to his departing back. Looking at Vincent's gradually disappearing figure in the mine tunnel, the sweating Colt tugged at William's sleeve and carefully asked, "Are you letting him leave just like that?" "He rejected your suggestion." "I'll need to be wary if he had agreed immediately." As William spoke, he snapped his fingers at the webweaver's corpse at the side of the hall. A deep spatial rift opened, and a few bandaged hands reached out and carried the corpse in. "Why?" Colt looked nervously at the huge hand that stretched out of the spatial rift and asked. "People who yearn for power often shouldn't obtain it. People like him who have no ambition to rule or better choices." Colt nodded, having somewhat understood the theory. "Let's go." William placed his hand on Colt's body. With a flash of lightning, the two of them disappeared from the hall as if they had never existed. According to the Seven Holy Spirits theory of the creation model, air was the basic elemental that formed the soul. It was the breath transformed from the Holy Spirit, Mother, and it was the lightest part of creation. Therefore, high-level storm spells were often related to the soul, and the most effective way to distinguish between living creatures and the undead was to observe if a target was breathing. In short, the air in this world was completely different from the world William came from. "But why does it smell like ionized ozone?" There was a brief flash of lightning, and William and Colt appeared out of thin air in an ornate hotel room. As soon as they landed, William complained. "What's ozone?" Colt repeated the strange and awkward pronunciation and asked curiously. "Nothing." William covered his nose and opened the window. Colt nodded and looked around before asking, "Where are we?" The rose-scented breeze blew away the faint stench. William looked out the window and replied absent-mindedly, "The Stallion Hotel. I've been staying here. By the way, is this far from your house?" Colt looked at the Platinum City-style chalkstone building outside and shook his head. "I've never been here." This was an uptown area near the Rose Palace. The guards wouldn't even let him pass when they saw his clothes. "Then do you know the way back?" William turned his head and asked. "I do." Colt nodded. William walked over and took out a bottle of green potion and an ancient sheepskin scroll from his robe before handing them to him. "Go home and give this bottle of potion to your father. Although it can't treat his broken leg, it won't be a problem recovering his blind eyes. Then, explain to him what happened in the mine. As long as you tear open this scroll, it will teleport you to Sigmund's. Do you understand?" Colt took the potion and scroll and nodded seriously. Then, he asked in confusion, "What about you? Presiding judge, where are you going next?" William turned to look at the gorgeous and magnificent astral lighthouse outside the window and at the deep magical light on the top of the tower. "I plan on taking a look there," William replied. Colt also looked at the lighthouse before immediately looking away. When he was young, many elders had warned him not to stare at the blinking lights. Otherwise, his soul would be sucked in. "Just taking a look?" Colt asked hesitantly. William replied very casually, "I'm just going to take a look. I want to see what changes were made to the previous design." Astral lighthouse, astral observation room. 9 dark red gems were connected into the shape of a sickle by elementium silver. This was the arranged star map of the Stranger constellation. The Stranger constellation symbolized death, wanderers, and endless wandering. They facilitated the study of the 3 spells, necromancy, shadow rays, and storm. A gray-haired old man with a withered face sat quietly in front of a star map, and his surroundings were filled with an ominous aura. The 3 dim phantoms constantly gathered into a human form beside him, but they dissipated the moment they were about to take human form. It was like some kind of practice. After a long time, the 3 phantoms exploded, turning into pitch-black shadows that fused into the old man's shadow. He slowly opened his eyes and said, "Are you here to destroy the resound records again?" Outside the astral observatory, a dignified middle-aged man stood. This person was the overlord of Thorn City, Simon Wald. He looked at the elder and nodded. "After all, it's something that happened below the Silverstream mine. It might be troublesome if the church finds out." The old man sneered and said, "It might have been someone sent by the church. I heard that the 8th Order has already noticed the problem here." Duke Simon shook his head. "As long as the demon burial doesn't send someone over, the matter hasn't spiraled out of control. Our cooperation can continue. The 8th Order only covets the sword in the Holy Sepulcher as usual. The reason is secondary." The old man's expression didn't change as he said, "But I heard that the 8th Order sent a strong person over. He seems to be the young man who stood out in Dragon Breath Province a while ago." Duke Simon revealed a meaningful smile and said, "The Silver Blood daughter, Nizamar. Hey, her nickname is quite compatible with this city. But it's fine. My people are keeping a close eye on her. Moreover, the support the local church can provide her is limited. She can't do anything." The elder seemed to ease up a little when he heard that. He closed his eyes again and said, "There's no need for you to come personally if it's just the deletion of the resound record. Tell me, what else do you want?" Simon said, "I'm just here to inform you that the preparation for the eternal gift is only a step away from completion. Our cooperation will soon come to a successful end. When the time comes, you, as a legendary, will still be the next Tower Guardian of Stranger Tower. 1,000 years later, even my weakest follower has become a Demon King." Chapter 42 Eternal Gift. The Eternal Gift was the ancient secret ritual of the Blackwater Kingdom. It needed to construct a miniature netherworld through extremely rich necromancy magic power to have the executor of the secret ritual and the remnant soul imprint on the ancestor's corpse resonate. Spellcasters could either gather those soul imprints to strengthen their spirit or summon the corpses to rise and become their slaves. Of course, as the price of controlling this powerful force, the former might suffer the latent risk of ending up with schizophrenia, and the latter might lose control of the corpses because they failed to control their ancestors' will. Back when Great Sage Yates was compiling the astral laws, the undead mages from the Rotten Moon Church in the Blackwater Province hoped to compile the Eternal Gift into the catalogue of undead magic. However, they were ultimately excluded by the First Astral Council because this spell contained too much moon realm worship. Logically speaking, all records of this secret ritual should have been destroyed during the era when the astral laws were promoted via the Great Book Burning campaign. However, one day, Duke Simon brought an ancient copy to the astral lighthouse's guardian. Duke Simon offered to help the old man, who had been stuck on the precipice of the legendary stage for many years, enter the legendary stage by using moon realm magic to recreate the eternal gift. The preparations for the eternal gift are almost complete. The elder opened his eyes again when he heard Simon's words. He stared at Duke Simon and asked suspiciously, "Is it that fast? Shouldn't the magical power from the astral world enter career along this astral lighthouse after the correct celestial cycle is in place? Only then can a magical environment that meets the requirements of the eternal gift appear." Duke Simon shook his head and said, "That's too slow. I've done the math. The next correct celestial cycle will be this year's frost moon. It will introduce too many variables in between." The old man sneered and said, "Are there too many variables, or have you blown your cover?" Simon replied, "I've already said that the church won't discover anything here. Their actions have always been under my control, including the movements of the woman sent by the Eighth Order." The elder, who was familiar with the efficiency of Thorn City's intelligence system, involuntarily nodded. Then, he asked in confusion, "Then, what other variables are you worried about?" "These so-called variables refer to something that can't be predicted." Simon sighed and continued, "You've seen the records left behind by the resound spell, right?" The old man nodded. He had seen the records of the gray-haired, silver-eyed magic chanter killing the supervisor sent to the Silverstream mine by the Duke several times after receiving the news. Be it the rapid release of ice barrier to block the supervisor's dragon lightning spear or the unknown teleportation spell, they left a deep impression on him. He estimated that if he encountered that person outside the range of this astral lighthouse, the chance of victory was 50 to 50. In Thorn City, only Sage of Scorching Scars, Vincent, could certainly suppress that person. Of course, if he could use the power of this astral lighthouse to fight, that would be another matter. "I have." "Why?" the old man asked. "That mage who's very likely at the master level seems to have appeared out of thin air. My subordinates can't find any clues about his origins," Simon said in frustration. In this era, be it a formal registration or a heretic, it was very difficult for a powerful magic chanter to hide his identity, let alone find any clues to his identity. Becoming a magic chanter required a large amount of resources, and it was impossible for there to be no traces of the use of those resources. It was no wonder he was so anxious. Threats from the unknown were always the most terrifying. But even if you plan on holding the eternal gift immediately, how do you plan on resolving the necessary condition that is mana density? The old man asked. "Holy Sepulcher. I plan on holding the eternal gift in the Holy Sepulcher." Duke Simon's answer widened the old man's eyes. The Holy Sepulcher was located under Thorn City's graveyard. Or rather, Thorn City's graveyard was built above the Holy Sepulcher. It was the holy land worshipped by generations of the ancient Blackwater Kingdom, and it was also the worship source of the Blackwater Swamp's ancestors and the dead. In addition, it likely had the richest undead magic on the Vic continent. After all, it was impossible to find a place with so many intact corpses elsewhere. But to any magic chanter who was familiar with history, it had a different identity. The location of the rotten moon tide more than 1,000 years ago. The tide of undead that had once swept through the entire continent. Some people had once guessed that the source of the disaster was a failed eternal gift. No, no, no. This is crazy. With this in mind, the old man shook his head repeatedly. Moreover, ignoring the risk of holding a secret ritual there, as Tower Guardian, I can't leave the astral lighthouse. Regarding this, Simon said very easily, if it's only half a day, can't you get a magic chanter at the same level as you to replace you? I think Vincent will be very willing to help. The elder fell silent. He thought for a while before saying, but it's still too dangerous to hold this ritual in the Holy Sepulcher. Moreover, don't tell me you don't know why Judgment 4, the weapon coveted by the 8th Parish, was left in the Holy Sepulcher. Simon naturally knew what he was referring to. He had been to the Holy Sepulcher more than 20 years ago and learned about the unknown history from the inscriptions in the Holy Sepulcher. It was 10 years after William Kane left when an era of war ensued among the 7 kingdoms on the continent. The Blackwater royal family, which was at a military disadvantage, made a crazy decision to awaken the wraith of the old king that had once triggered the rotten moontide and summon the dead to be used as soldiers. And this plan naturally failed. Among the fractured judges, only 2 people provided a timely response to the Blackwater Kingdom's request for help in time: the 4th judge, Black Swordsman Blake, and the last judge, Jackdaw Coles. To prevent the rotten moon wraith from breaking through the seal, the 2 legendary judges died there. Before dying, Blake used his last breath to seal the wraith under the Holy Sepulcher. Judgment 4 became his tombstone. Other than a stone plaque set up by the judges who arrived later for their former friends, this story was not recorded in history books. But more than 1,000 years have passed. No matter how strong the wraith is, it should have dissipated, Simon replied. However, the old man still shook his head. Anything except this. I'm able to turn a blind eye to those people in your mage hall studying moon realm magic. You turned a blind eye because you want to become a member of the Astral Council, and I'm the only person who's willing and can help you advance to the legendary domain. Simon cut off the old man. I'm not negotiating with you. As I've said, I'm informing you of your only chance to advance to legendary. When Simon was going down the tower, a hazy and constantly changing star in his ether domain suddenly sent him news. My arrangements are almost done. As long as the actor appears, the ritual can begin at any time. It was the nightmare maid speaking to him through an anchor in his soul. Me too. Unfortunately, that old coward cherishes his life too much. He only agreed to come out of his turtle shell under my threats, Simon replied. So you ultimately plan on making that tower guardian the fuel for the ritual and not Vincent? The nightmare maid asked through the ether domain. You saw that old fellow's character as well. Other than his bloodline, he's useless. He consumed countless resources but couldn't advance to legendary because of his lack of mental strength tempering. Give the same resources to Vincent and he's probably already on the cusp of breaking through to the divine realm. I don't think there's a need to say which one of them is more valuable. When Simon went downstairs, he transmitted his thoughts to the nightmare maid through the ether domain. During this period, he accidentally bumped into a mage wearing a simple robe and a hood. Sorry, the person apologized politely in a hoarse voice and made way for him. It's fine. Simon didn't mind too much. He didn't even look at the person and walked down the stairs. At this moment, a new message from the nightmare maid in the ether domain arrived. The problem isn't the value of the person, but that using him as fuel is equivalent to declaring war on the Astral Council. Then so be it. I did all this to overturn those rules, at least in the Blackwater Swamp. If the world is ruled by such mediocre people, this world will only be pathetic, Simon replied. After turning the corner of the last staircase, he finally arrived at the bottom of the lighthouse. He looked at the sunlight outside the door and felt unprecedentedly relaxed. A new era is about to begin, he said. On the stairs of the lighthouse, the magic chanter who had accidentally bumped into Simon stopped in his tracks. He looked at the runes embedded in the wall and slowly lowered his hood, revealing grayish-white hair. He stroked the familiar runes and muttered, "Things from the old era really never disappear." 1,000 years later, even my weakest follower has become a demon king. Chapter 43 Rifts and Cracks. In the era when the Doomsday Watchers were active, the Mage Guild reached its peak under William's management. The most outstanding magic researchers on the continent of the time gathered and jointly proposed the astral circuit. After the Magic Dawn mission was completed, William, who had publicized the astral circuit technology, had been looking forward to the game's sequel. Would it be a world where magic and steam combined? However, things didn't go as planned. At least 1,000 years later, this world still looked like it had medieval productivity. However, later generations realized the astral circuit. This made William very curious about how they solved those technical problems. The greatest technical difficulty of the astral circuit wasn't building the astral lighthouse or even building a magic network that covered the continent. These were all secular problems that could be done as long as a ruler dared to invest resources. The true difficulty was finding many paths that could bypass the moon realm and connect Career to the astral world. In this world, stars weren't true celestial bodies, but holes. They penetrated the moon realm that symbolized nothingness and allowed cretins from the astral world to pass through themselves. Those cretins turned into starlight after being filtered by the world shell. In William's era, Due to the drastic changes in the moon realm, even the greatest astral constellation master in the world couldn't accurately predict the direction of the stars. Without a stable prediction, it was impossible to draw a star map, and it was impossible to build a natural astral circuit. According to his calculations, it would take at least 500 years for the moon realm to gradually calm down. However, he learned from Liliana that the astral laws had been established slightly over 200 years after he left. Then, how did they bypass the unstable moon realm and head to the astral world to build a circuit? The answer was that they hadn't bypassed the moon realm at all. When William saw the dense spatial stabilization runes engraved on the tower, his heart fell. When he saw the huge moon realm rift on the top of the tower through the spell, moon realm detection, he almost blew a gasket. The designer of the astral laws didn't choose to bypass the unpredictable moon realm. Instead, he simply and crudely chiseled open the world shell and passed through the moon realm to build the astral circuit. The scar of sorrow suppressed by the Twilight Fortress used to be the largest moon realm rift in Career. That was the opening to the world shell, and it was also the largest portal for the moon realm's invasion of Vic continent back then. As for the rift at the top of the astral lighthouse, although it wasn't as large as the scar of sorrow, once a void sovereign wanted to do something through it, it would cause catastrophic consequences. Back then, after the Doomsday Watcher repelled the moon realm's invasion, it took a lot of effort to seal the wound. Even so, the scar of sorrow was still the world shell's weak point to this day. The stumbling demon summoned there proved this. And they dug open the world shell themselves just to monopolize the astral world's magic power source. William still remembered that Liliana had said that there were a total of 24 astral lighthouses on the continent. If the moon realm rift here wasn't an exception, then there were 24 moon realm rifts evenly distributed on the Vic continent. This news was too shocking. William did a simple calculation. If the moon realm planned on invading, the scale and strength would be more than twice as large as 1,000 years ago. Considering that the rifts covered the entire continent, the trouble would be at least 10 times greater. What did you guys do after I left? William stared at the rift and sighed. His hand that was stroking the runes on the tower trembled slightly. He could sense that the spatial runes used to prevent lunar monsters from entering Career were very powerful. Ordinary lunar monsters couldn't even approach this place. However, these rune barriers were only superficial decorations to the Void Sovereigns. They didn't destroy them purely because they didn't want to do so for the time being. Wasn't any of the judges going to stop those bastards from doing so? Alright, the astral laws were formulated more than 200 years after he left. Many of his judgment companions probably weren't around then, but among the 13 judges, other than mortals, there were still many long-lived ones. Dawa, king of the dragons, Kol's jackdaw of the Croman, Ramid's Shadowmoon of the High Elves, and Kus, whose body was already immortal. If nothing unexpected happened, their lifespans were definitely enough to live to this day. Didn't they try to stop these things, or did they try and fail? No matter what, there must be a deeper reason behind the establishment of the Riel Empire 800 years ago. The only thing worth rejoicing about now was that the size of the Moon Realm Rift wasn't enough for a Void Sovereign's main body to pass through. Even their incarnations couldn't squeeze in. As long as it was something that had a health bar, he could defeat it. With this in mind, William retracted his gaze from the crack and continued climbing up the stairs of the lighthouse. He pondered as he walked. This astral lighthouse had been in operation for nearly 800 years. During this period, no lunar monsters had invaded the Vic continent. At the very least, he hadn't seen any similar records in the historical documents he had read over the past few days. Just as he had thought, the fact that the Void Sovereigns didn't use these rifts only meant that they didn't want to do so for the time being. However, this didn't mean that they weren't plotting something. Instead, they had been making preparations for more than 800 years. An unknown threat was the most terrifying threat. Then, what were they up to? William, who was walking in the shadows, turned his body to avoid the patrol route of a fire soul. After entering the middle level of the lighthouse, the security measures and spell traps along the way began to increase. The patrolling security guards also changed from guards to various elemental souls. Helpless, William changed his illusion type stealth to shadow type stealth. Of course, if he was still discovered like this, he could only try peerless type stealth. Hopefully, that wouldn't happen. After Duke Simon returned to the Rose Palace, he found out that Vincent had been waiting for him in the conference hall. Seeing Simon enter, Vincent requested the adjutant who had returned with him out to leave and lock the door on his way out. At the same time, he used the magical medium in his hand to knock on the door. Blue lightning spread along the magical medium to the four walls of the room. All sound in the room was blocked, and no one outside could hear their conversation. This was a lightning element magic power usage technique he had figured out, to block sound by causing light spatial ripples. This technique wasn't included in the spell catalog of the astral laws, so it was considered a heretical act in a sense. However, the two people in the room didn't care about this. "I can take it that you're trying to assassinate me," Simon teased. He was probably a little relaxed now that the preparations for the ritual were complete. However, seeing Vincent's serious expression, Simon restrained his smile and asked, "What's wrong? Did you not deal with the Silverstream mine?" Vincent shook his head and said, "There's still something that hasn't been blocked." As he spoke, he pointed the magical medium in his hand at Simon's forehead. A weak bolt of lightning was connected between the magical medium and Simon's glabella. In Simon's ether domain, his connection with the spirit of the three-moon realm was temporarily severed. Simon turned nervous. He looked around furtively and asked, "What exactly do you want?" "I want to tell you what I just encountered under the Silverstream mine, but I can't let others know about this. This includes the few-month-old Moon Realm spirit who signed a contract with you," Vincent quickly explained. "What happened? Could that person really be Demon Burial's paladin?" Simon asked suspiciously. "No, it's much scarier than that. Listen to me first. Before I finish speaking, don't refute me like a rational normal person." Then, Vincent began to talk about how he had encountered the magic chanter who called himself the presiding judge after descending to the mine. He spoke quickly, but his logic was very clear, and his words didn't carry any emotion. In the beginning, Simon had planned on interrupting Vincent a few times to get the details, but Vincent spoke too quickly and didn't give him a chance to interrupt. When Simon heard that the magic chanter had used divine realm frost magic, his expression turned solemn. When he heard that the magic chanter wanted Vincent to become the new ruler of the Blackwater province, Simon fell completely silent. "In the end, he didn't attack me when I turned around and left. I immediately rushed here after leaving the mine and learned from the butler that you had gone to the astral lighthouse and would be back soon. That's why I've been waiting here for you to return," Vincent finally said. Then, he looked into Simon's eyes and asked, "What should we do next?" Simon looked at him in silence. After a while, he slowly said, "What about you? What do you think?" Vincent analyzed and said, "First, we need to figure out the identity of that magic chanter. It's impossible for a magic chanter who can reach the divine realm under the astral laws to choose to help the Blackwater province become independent. And if he's a heretical mage, he cannot reach that realm silently. 50 years ago, a heretical mage who had reached the divine realm appeared in Shattered Tooth province. To satisfy his huge magic power consumption, he spread a withering plague in Shattered Tooth province. It was a disease that could wither the body and soul after being infected. All the infected would gradually burn their souls to become the source of his magic power. This chaos called the Withering Calamity was ultimately resolved by the Demon Burial and the Platinum Ring. The method was to slaughter everyone infected with the Withering Plague and cut off the magical power source of the Divine Realm heretical mage. From this example, it could be seen that if he relied on burning his soul as a source of magic power, the commotion when reaching the Divine Realm would undoubtedly be disastrous. And he said that his goal is to escape the control of the gods, so it's unlikely that he reached the Divine Realm through the Moon Realm. Then, there are only two possibilities. First, he's a powerhouse who reached the Divine Realm before the astral laws appeared. For example, we once saw the judges under the stone plaque in the Holy Sepulcher. This corresponds to him calling himself the presiding judge. Vincent continued analyzing. As for the second possibility, it's even crazier. He might be a prophet like Terra I. If that's the case, everything makes sense. This is because the descent of a Holy Spirit definitely won't be restricted by the astral laws. Duke Simon listened to Vincent's endless analysis. After a long time, he said, "That's not what I'm asking." Vincent stopped and looked at Duke Simon in confusion. Duke Simon looked into Vincent's eyes and deliberated before saying, "What do you think of what he said about hoping that you would become the new ruler of the Blackwater province?" Vincent looked incredulous. He never expected Simon to ask this question. Simon walled. I hope I can still call you that. Vincent also stared into the other party's eyes and said, ignoring my servitude to you as a mage consultant for 24 years, if I had, even the slightest intention of replacing you, do you think I would have told you everything about this? Or have you long forgotten your original intention of fighting for independence for the Blackwater province? Have you become a monster that only knows about seizing power? After Vincent finished speaking, the two of them looked at each other in silence for a long time. Finally, Duke Simon broke the silence. I'm sorry, Vincent. My current position doesn't allow me to miss out on any threats. Vincent said, but you can always trust me. Duke Simon asked, then what do you plan on doing next? Vincent replied, confirm that person's identity first. If he's a prophet or a judge, I don't think it's impossible to cooperate with him. The conditions he proposes aren't worse than the three goddesses. When the time comes, as long as you swear to him that you will give up on cooperation with the Moon Realm, he will agree to let you. This was also why Vincent wanted to block Duke Simon's connection with the spirit of the Moon Realm. But before he could finish speaking, Duke Simon interrupted him. No. Duke Simon's expression returned to that of superciliousness. No, there's no turning back. Be it the king and rebel conversion or the eternal gift, all the rituals are ready. Go to the astral lighthouse's astral observatory later and replace that old turtle as the tower guardian for half a day, Duke Simon said to Vincent in a commanding tone. After the ritual on my side is completed, there should be a few days before the astral council closes the stranger tower. When the time comes, use the authority of the tower to break through to that realm. After that, you, I, and the Blackwater Kingdom will announce our new life to this world. Vincent looked at Duke Simon, who was gradually becoming fanatical, with a wooden expression. He felt like he was looking at a stranger. The preparations for the ritual have been completed. When did that happen? Duke Simon didn't answer Vincent's question. What about the Divine Realm magic chanter? How are you going to deal with him? Vincent continued asking. When everything is settled, even a Divine Realm mage can't threaten the new Blackwater Kingdom, Duke Simon replied. Otherwise, why would I have the confidence to gain independence from the Riel Empire? 1,000 years later, even my weakest follower has become a demon king. Chapter 44 letter. Going back to the Walled family's lineage, its ancestors could be traced back to the ancient king of Blackwater who triggered the rotten moontide of the undead 1,000 years ago. Be it the king and rebel or the eternal gift rituals, they were all legacies secretly handed down by the Walled family over the years, so that they could restore the former glory of the Blackwater Kingdom one day. It relied on the king and rebel ritual to obtain the authority and strength of the ancient mythical god king, Oka, and then on the eternal gift to create an immortal army of the dead that didn't rest while being absolutely loyal. This was the plan Simon had proposed to Vincent in the Silverstream mine more than 20 years ago to build the foundation of the new Blackwater Kingdom. This plan was supposed to be executed back then, but Simon and Vincent found 7 seals that sealed the rotten moonwraith when they went to the deepest depths of the Holy Sepulcher. From the stone plaque in front of the seal, they learned the history of the 2 judges, the Black Swordsman and Jackdaw, who died there 1,000 years ago to seal the Walled ancestors' wraith. The last sentence of the plaque warned future generations that the seal here couldn't be released for 1,000 years. Otherwise, no one would be able to control that power. Sensing the powerful power in the seal, the 2 of them chose to leave and decided to make plans. Today, the deadline described on the stone plaque was here. So, help me like you used to, okay? Duke Simon requested Vincent. Vincent reminded, but can it succeed? The king and rebel ritual set up under the Silverstream mine has been discovered. The presiding judge will likely come and destroy it halfway through the ritual. Regarding this, Duke Simon said confidently, the ritual arrangements under the Silverstream mine are only second-hand preparations. Now that I've been discovered, it can be used as a smokescreen. I've already prepared the location of the ritual. Where? Vincent asked in confusion. He had never heard of a second ritual being prepared. In the deepest part of the Holy Sepulcher, in the chamber with 7 seals, Duke Simon replied frankly. That was also the location where the eternal gift was planned. Could it be that you plan on holding the eternal gift and the king and rebel ritual together? Vincent asked in disbelief. Even a mage apprentice knew that because magic of different natures would interfere and convert between each other, powerful spells of a certain scale couldn't be carried out together. However, Duke Simon nodded and replied, once the eternal gift begins, magic power will gather from the millions of corpses in Thorn City's graveyard and resonate to form a miniature netherworld. This way, even without the Skull Temple's energy supply, the magic power fuel needed to complete the King and Rebel ritual will be sufficient. Believe me, I've made all the preparations. Then, how are you going to balance the conflict between the two powerful spells? The rituals are held in the same tomb, Vincent asked. There's a way. With the help of the three goddesses, the magical power of King and Rebel's ritual magic can be adjusted to a level similar to the eternal gift. As Simon spoke, he slowly pushed away the magical medium that had been blocking his connection with the Moon Realm spirit. Are there any other questions? Vincent fell silent for a moment before asking, then who's the sacrifice for the King and Rebel ritual? Is it the cripple you've been raising in the dungeon? 10 years ago, Duke Simon had secretly brought an unknown illegitimate son of the Empire's royal family to the Rose Palace's dungeon. Back then, Vincent had thought that Simon planned on using this illegitimate son as a wedge for the complicated royal faction struggles in the Platinum Palace. However, over the years, other than raising the child in the dungeon, Duke Simon had never done anything else. He didn't nurture him as an heir, nor did he use him to secretly contact the royal family. It was a long time before Vincent realized that this child with the bloodline of the Empire's royal family could barely satisfy the requirements of the King and Rebel ritual offerings because he had a very small chance of inheriting the Empire's throne. However, just as the presiding judge had said, ritual magic focused on the reproduction of myths. How much effect could an illegitimate son who only had a slight chance of becoming the Empire's emperor play the legendary God King? He's part of the ritual. Simon gave a curt answer. He didn't explain further. Seeing his confident expression, Vincent hesitated for a moment before finally nodding slowly. So, what part do I play in all of this? Time is tight now. We have to complete the ritual before the Divine Realm Mage reacts. Go to the Astral Lighthouse's Astral Observatory now and ignore everything else that ensues. All the rituals will be completed tonight. After that, I'll tell you how the Guardian opens the Astral Lighthouse. You have to advance to Legendary before the Astral Council reacts. It's that simple. In other words, I don't need to do anything other than be used as a hostage. Vincent asked. If you don't do this, that old turtle won't dare to go to the Holy Sepulcher. He won't have a chance to react once the ritual begins, so you just have to wait there for my news, Duke Simon replied. Every Astral Lighthouse needed a legendary or at least a magic chanter close to a legendary to be the Tower Guardian and be in charge of managing the local magical power network. The authority of the Tower Guardian was granted by the Astral Council and was adjusted every 5 years. As the Astral Observatory at the top of the tower led straight to the astral world, it was the best holy land for magic chanters to edify their powers. The Astral Council would also specially transfer magic chanters close to the legendary domain to be the Tower Guardians to help them break through to legendary. The Tower Guardian was allowed to temporarily leave the Astral Observatory during emergencies, but he had to find someone of the same realm to hold down the fort in his place. If a non-authorized personnel entered the Astral Observatory to manage the magic network in his place, that person's life and death were at the Tower Guardian's whim. Vincent looked at Duke Simon and fell silent for a long time before finally nodding. It was very dangerous, but he had done countless more dangerous things in the past 20 years. But this time, I have a condition, Vincent said. In Duke Simon's impression, this was the first time he was raising conditions, but Simon still nodded and said, "Tell me. I'll agree to anything possible. Protect my daughter, Liliana, before this chaos ends." Duke Simon looked into Vincent's eyes and replied solemnly, "You have my word." As he watched Vincent leave, the star that symbolized the nightmare maid in Simon's ether domain asked him, "Since you've promised him, why didn't you give him that letter? Then, tell him that his daughter's soul has fallen into the nightmare swamp." Simon shook his head. If he knows about this, do you think he would still go to the Astral Lighthouse as I planned? So you lied to him. How heartless. Not long ago, you clearly said that his value far exceeded others. The nightmare maid's laughter sounded. It was your subordinate who pulled his daughter's soul into the nightmare swamp. Did you do this on purpose? How is that possible? It was just a coincidence. Moreover, didn't you say that as long as his daughter isn't around, he will become a warrior again? I'm helping you recover your former warrior. Simon closed his eyes when he heard that. After a long time, he said, "There's no need, the Blackwater Kingdom doesn't need warriors like him in the future. 1,000 years later, even my weakest follower has become a demon king." Chapter 45 in the archives. In the Astral Lighthouse's archives, two pitch-black gems the size of half a person floated in midair, emitting a faint chill. Although William had been hiding in the shadows with Walking Shadow, he got into trouble when he entered the archives. He never expected the Guardian to be a shadow soul. As he strolled along the shadows cast by the rows of bookshelves, he bumped into two pitch-black shadows who were patrolling in the shadows around the corner. The two pitch-black, deformed figures and the shadowy William looked at each other for a few seconds. In a daze, William felt as if a green exclamation mark had jumped out of his head. Before the two shadow souls sounded the alarm, he threw out two spinning illusory ring blades to imprison them. "Fortunately, I reacted quickly." William wiped the non-existent sweat on his forehead and muttered to himself. Otherwise, he needed to use peerless stealth. If he hadn't discovered that this astral lighthouse was essentially a moon realm rift, he might not have felt any psychological pressure when he turned peerless here. It didn't matter if the tower was destroyed if they fought. In any case, he had long made up his mind to uproot all the astral lighthouses on the continent. It didn't matter if it happened sooner or later. However, even he couldn't estimate what would happen if he destroyed the tower without making any preparations. Perhaps he would find the moon realm portal slapping him in the face. Thankfully, the spell, Shadow Cage, that imprisoned the two shadow souls lasted long enough. It probably wouldn't remove itself even after he finished viewing the entire tower. After applying another layer of illusion disguise over the shadow cage, William walked to the next row of archive racks and checked. Most of the files here contained the personal information of registered mages. These things were very valuable after he took over Thorn City, but they were of no help to him now. As he walked, he flipped through them. This took him about 10 minutes before he finally arrived at the last row of the archive shelves. Regarding the activity distribution of the Moon Realm parishes and underground organizations in the Blackwater province, William read the annotations on the archive shelf and became intrigued. He reached out and prepared to pull out the documents to take a look. However, a floating magic halo blocked his hand. William was slightly surprised. He was still in the illusory state of Walking Shadow. Ordinary defensive barriers shouldn't be able to stop him. Moreover, it was a relatively high-level defensive barrier. William took out an appraisal scroll from his spatial rift and pasted it in front of the archive shelf. As the scroll burst into a faint blue flame before turning to ashes, a message appeared in his mind. It has a self-destruct function. According to the information from the appraisal scroll, if he cracked the barrier by force, it would incinerate the files within. This was a spell that didn't exist in his era. It was probably developed later due to the need for confidentiality. This troubled William. Dissecting the barrier spell required time and equipment. He couldn't undo the spell quickly. If only Sabila were here at this time. Looking at the unfamiliar magical barrier in front of him, William suddenly missed his companion judge. Sabila Norn was the greatest astrologer of that era. She had the eye of God bestowed by the Holy Spirit, the Lady, and could understand the composition of all enchantments and barrier spells at a glance. It was also because of this ability that she was the strongest enchanter and barrier master of that era. It was said that in her eyes, the entire world was a painting woven from pure magic. She only needed to slightly adjust the direction of the magical fabric to turn a spell on its head. William also saved a large sum of money from buying appraisal scrolls in the early stages of the game thanks to her. The appraisal scrolls extracted in the later stages of the game were at 99+ in his backpack all year round. To ensure she had both the Eye of God and Legendary Craftsman, William reloaded his save more than 200 times. He turned delirious from all the reloading to the point of not caring much when he eventually got the negative status of alcoholism alongside his goal. It was normal for an astrologer and enchanter to drink more alcohol. That was what William thought back then. It was only when he asked her to enchant his equipment and her accidentally adding the wrong stats because she was drunk that William realized that he had been too hasty. A vampire-only weapon with the exorcism attribute, a desert set that allowed one to breathe underwater, assassination daggers with explosive runes, and stealth sets that automatically activated fire cloak. William seriously suspected that she was a demon who wanted to tease the user. He couldn't help but laugh now that he recalled all the shenanigans. He wondered if she was William came back to his senses. It was already 1,000 years later. To mortals who seldom lived past 100 years, she should be long gone. A sudden feeling of loss filled his chest. He wondered what her outcome was. Did she fulfill her goal of opening a tavern in the Storm Kingdom's myriad feet city after retirement and fill her wine cellar with different spirits from all over the Vic continent? When he was done with the matters in Blackwater province, he planned on visiting Myriad Feet City to take a look. After making this decision, William turned his attention to the archive shelf. He sighed. It seemed like he could only use some clumsy methods. William snapped his fingers, and a deep spatial rift opened above the archive shelf. A few bandaged hands and spider legs reached out and lifted the entire shelf. He would slowly study it later. Legendary summoning spell, Gluttony Realm Demon. This spatial rift was a summoned creature to begin with. The hands that reached out were its organ for hunting, and it would gradually change according to the prey it swallowed. Of course, things like shelves were indigestible. To the Gluttony Realm Demon, this was probably as uncomfortable as eating a rock. It can't be helped. Opening a large spatial door causes too much commotion. Just be a temporary storage space for the time being. Sorry for being hard on you. I'll treat you to lunar monsters next time. William steeled his heart and ignored the cry of the summoned creature in the ether domain before leaving the archives. He had spent too much time inside. It's time to take a look at the astral observatory at the top of the tower, William thought. He continued up the stairs and dodged a few batches of elemental souls and moving armor. After circling a few traps and barriers, William finally arrived at the door of the astral observatory. It was also at this moment that a weak star fragment extinguished in the sky full of stars in William's ether domain. William would add the mark spell to all the enchanted items he made to prevent himself from failing to find his items one day. Which enchantment tool he made was destroyed. With this in mind, William quickly checked what the missing star fragments were. Then, his expression turned serious. The missing star fragments represented the phoenix pendant he had given Liliana.